Jim Flyzik.
Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss how the explosion of data, so-called big data, is being addressed in government programs. With me today on the show are Zach Goldstein, the Deputy Chief Information Officer at NOAA, Gus Taveras, the Chief Technology Officer at DIA, Dan Doney, the Chief Innovation Officer at DIA, Suzi, Iacono, the Deputy Assistant Director at NSF, Audie, Hittle, the CTO of EMC Isilon Federal, Gagan, Mehra, the Chief Evangelist, Terracotta, Software AG Government Solutions, and Scott Gaydos, the Chief Technologist, Federal Healthcare HP Enterprise Services. Let's get into the topics and hear about the big data explosion. Let's first get some ideas, some examples of how big data is impacting programs in government agencies. Zach Goldstein over at NOAA, how is big data impacting programs over at NOAA?
Well, Jim, at NOAA, big data is all about doing our mission. We can't do it without big data. The mission from NOAA goes from the surface of the sun to the bottom of the ocean. And the missions range from protecting marine mammals to forecasting the direction of hurricanes. We all know about predicting the weather. What ties the vast variety of missions that NOAA has together is big data.
Sure.
And some examples of it, we have geostationary and polar satellites that provide over almost 2 billion observations a day.
Wow.
We put 6 terabytes per day of data into our forecast models.
Wow.
Our high-performance computing operations, we have supercomputers for both research and development as well as the actual forecasting. 3.5 billion observations a day, 15 million products per day. Our archive is growing at 30 petabytes per year.
Right.
We can't do our job. We can't save lives and protect livelihoods without big data. A really good example of that is in the recent Hurricane Sandy experience. We did a data denial exercise where we said, what would happen if you took away the satellite, the polar satellite data, and ran the supercomputer models without it? Sandy doesn't make landfall.
Oh, wow.
That's what big data means to NOAA.
Understand all the things that NOAA does. I'm glad we have you here informing the public, because so many things are going on that are so important. So great. Gus Taveras, how about over DIA? How is big data impacting some program strategies at the DIA?
Well, I want to echo what Zach said about NOAA with a different target.
Okay.
We're not looking at marine mammals, but we're looking at some other. We're focused on a different target. At DIA, today, DIA is a combat support agency, first in all source and intelligence, and focused on preventing strategic surprise from our adversary and delivering decision advantage to our warfighters, to our decision makers, our policy makers, and it's comprised of, and just like you said, it's the backbone, it's the lifeblood. Big data is the lifeblood of our agency, and but it's. Again, and I think everybody in the panel will agree with me, it's vast, it's fast, it's furious, it's a fire hose. And we've got multiple disciplines at DIA providing this big data. We've got the analysis branch, which are doing, this is where the guys that actually sift through all this big data, leveraging those analytics to determine, hey, what's important, what isn't. Like I heard the panel talking about earlier, sifting through the needle in the haystack, in a stack of silver needles, right? And then also we have a collection management branch, which is just simply focused on collection. And then we have a MASN directorate and a human and a counterintelligence directorate. So you can imagine the vast amounts of information that are coming in. And that's just talking about our trade craft. And then imagine us complementing that with that social media and the explosion there. So that's huge in big data. The Twitter feeds, and with the growth of that, of all that information that's coming in, it makes it very hard to, if you don't move into this new construct that you've heard the IC move to is eyesight, and I've heard you talk about it in your show in the past.
Right, yeah, and actually we're going to get into talking a little bit about, how this is changing your infrastructure and analytical tools and things like that, to cope with all this. So we'll get into those questions.
Exactly, and that's why I'm looking forward to this eyesight construct that's coming in the cloud computing environment, which allows us to crunch through that big data, allows us to leverage, in an agile manner, leverage a lot of this capability that's coming.
Great,
so
Gus.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Good, yeah, we'll come back and talk, drill down a little bit on that. Audie Hittle over at EMC. I think EMC, I think storage, EMC Isilon, so I'm guessing that big data for a company that's in the storage business, big data is probably something that you guys welcome to see, but how are you positioning the company to support your government customers in this space?
Well, at EMC, as you know, a $22 billion data storage company, Isilon is one of the ways EMC is positioning. Isilon was acquired about 2 years ago as a big data and analytics member of the portfolio, and it's specifically focused on that part of the portfolio which is dealing with file-based unstructured data. As you know, that's the largest growing segment of the data, dealing with all the audio, video,
Right.
Home directory type of unstructured data. And at EMC, what we're trying to do is recognizing that, of course, for the analytics to occur, you need somewhere to store that. So we support actually all of these agencies in terms of access to their data, enabling them to gain a deeper and broader access to that data to support their analytics and their missions.
Yeah, exciting stuff. Suzi, Iacono, we're excited to have you here, because National Science Foundation, I would think, is sort of in the middle of looking at ways that big data can be put to, a lot of interesting uses. Can you give us a little bit of idea how some of your strategies are being impacted by this explosion of big data?
Sure, thanks. So NSF has a great tagline. It is where discoveries begin. Okay, and so our mission is foundational research and education that's going to impact society 5, 10, 15, even 20 years down the road. That's our mission. So we didn't wake up yesterday and say, oh, big data. We should invest in big data.
Right.
We've been investing in data science and data analytics for several decades.
Right. Your job's to try to stay ahead of that curve.
Exactly. We have to stay, on the wave because our mission is to be on the frontiers of knowledge. But recognizing the increasing emphasis on big data, we decided that we wanted to make bigger investments in that kind of slice of data science.
Okay.
So we joined with the National Institutes of Health, and we developed a call for proposals, asking for teams to submit their best ideas, the most forward-looking ideas. Teams made up of researchers that typically go to NIH, medical researchers, working with computer scientists and mathematicians and statisticians.
Okay.
So this solicitation really formed the cornerstone of the White House National Big Data R&D Initiative. This was launched in 2012. And so we've already invested almost $30 million in new kinds of science. And so one example, breast cancer. So pulling together computer scientists working with medical researchers and cancer researchers, you can really make a difference with big data. So we know that breast cancer is the second most common kind of cancer for women. So by looking at hundreds, thousands of breast cancer biopsy images, you can go and look at subsamples from the images and get down to the most minute level of granularity in terms of attributes that cause cancer. And so we were able to, out of 6,000 different variables, pick the smallest set that was predictive of breast cancer. But then also there was an unexpected finding that the people who were most likely to survive, it was not predictions from the cancer tissue itself, but it was the adjoining tissue.
Oh.
And so no cancer researchers before that had ever even looked at that level of detail, the bench scientists, right? So we know that bringing in computer scientists with machine learning techniques with the cancer researchers, we're going to be able to make a really big difference.
That is cool. That's cool. Yeah, I think, when you think big data, people just think, huge amounts of video and this and the other. But what we're talking about here today and what we've heard already is we're talking about saving lives. We're talking about using data for very, very worthwhile purposes. Scott Gaydos, how about over at HP Enterprise Services? How are you positioning to support your customers with this explosion of big data?
Well, thanks, Jim. And you kind of gave me a great segue in there with the idea of saving lives. The area I support is within our federal health area. So we're privileged to be able to support large federal healthcare delivery organizations like the Department of Veterans Affairs, the military health system, massive healthcare payers like Medicare, and then great giant public health entities like the Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control. And so a couple couple of very cool things that we get to help our clients do. In one instance, what I call sort of today's big data is ways in which folks like Medicare are using data and using technologies provided by HP and other partners to sift through the mountains of claims data that comes in, millions and millions on the day, to look to spur investigation into possible fraud, waste, and abuse. So some of the technologies that we've put out there, and just the little microcosm that we can help affect, have helped prevent the actual payment of over $4 billion of fraud, waste, and abuse, and actually helped spur investigations that collected an additional $1 billion. So just in a small area, $5 billion of fraud, waste, and abuse avoided by being able to take a look at some of the big data. That's what I call today's use of big data. Then there's tomorrow's use of big data. So another area that we support is in the area of very focused research and development that HP sponsors along with other partners. So one example of that is an area like public health. So a public health entity like the Food and Drug Administration has a responsibility to go and both institute and then enforce food recalls. We don't want the populace to get sick. There's always recalls for things like peanut butter. It seems to happen a lot. But one of the challenges with doing a food recall is that there are unintended economic consequences of doing that. So in other words, recall peanut butter, shut down the entire supply chain, close everybody off, only to find out 2 months later or so that it was really kind of localized to somewhere in Arizona or California. Meanwhile, some peanut industry in Georgia or somewhere else is saying, hey, you just destroyed our supply chain, our business for no reason. It wasn't us. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at the art of the possible. So taking big data, that data that the public is making publicly available, say through their Twitter feeds or what have you. What are people talking about with their friends and their family? What are they eating? What are they doing? How do they feel? And can we infer from the public dialogue that's out there where there might be instances of recall? Can we geographically localize this kind of thing based on information that exists within the ether? So taking a look at technologies that allow us to strafe through the publicly available big data to find those predictive and leading indicators of where a recall might be most effective is sort of tomorrow's big data.
Sure, it's like Gus mentioned, the needle in the needle stack. You can actually isolate it to just that specific thing that needs to be dealt with, as opposed to a massive recall which impacts entire industries. Gagan, Mehra, how about over at Terracotta? How are you positioning to support customers in some of your strategies for doing that?
So Terracotta is in the space of doing in-memory data management.
Okay.
We make big data, big fast data.
Okay.
So when we started out, our largest customer had about 0.5 terabyte of data in memory. And we thought there would be no one who would need more than 0.5 terabyte. This is a few years back in memory. Then they came back and they said, we need 25 terabytes, in about a year's time. And now we have our largest customer that keeps hundreds of terabytes in memory. So we make companies, improve the performance, improve the processing speed of big data. The great thing about the product that we have is it allows you to process terabytes of data in milliseconds. We guarantee the latency.
Wow.
The other product that we just launched earlier this year allows you to do real-time actionable intelligence. It's called Ingenious. A big gap we saw in the market was around real-time analytics. Now, the term real-time means different things to different people. For some people, it might mean real-time is data that's 1 month old. For some, it might be 1 day old. But when we say real time, it's actually millisecond analytics. So this product allows you to analyze big data in real time by connecting with streaming applications. So you can hook it up to a weather service. You can hook it up to a genetic research lab. You can hook it up to a mobile device or a social network, anything that has streaming data. And you can combine all the data with data sitting at rest. It's like data in your Hadoop clusters, data in your data warehouses. So you can combine all that, define the rules you want to execute on that data, and based on all that, you can have insights in real time.
Wow.
So,
yeah, I've heard a lot of time people say we're living now in a fifth dimension where decision-making, time equals zero, and decision-making now is instantaneous. And many things that happen there's no warning for them. So decisions need to be as close to real time as possible.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about, with this big data explosion, what kind of impacts does that have on your IT infrastructure architecture, storage solutions, analytical tools, cloud strategies, bandwidth requirements? Seems to me that staying out in front of that could be a real challenge in and of itself. Let's start with Dan Doney this time over DIA. Dan, what are some of the ways that the big data explosion is impacting your IT infrastructure?
Thanks, Jim. I was schooled on this big data challenge as a young Navy submarine officer back in 1996.
Okay.
I was on the commissioning crew of the USS Seawolf. The government had spent enormous resources on the creation of that submarine, which had tremendous collection capabilities, and we were bringing in all sorts of data. When we went out to sea for the first time and turned on the systems, we found, and they had built automated mechanisms to parse through that data. We found that when we turned the system on, that the user was overwhelmed with contacts,
Right.
fish in the sea, too much data. So what it amounted to was we had to turn the system off and go back to manual mechanisms for processing that data.
Okay.
The key challenge there is that in the end, the human operator can only take in so much data. It really puts the pressure on pushing forward closer to the data and understanding of the value of information in a particular context. So we've made a lot of progress as far as this is concerned with Google's PageRank, with tremendous work recently and recommender engines to have the data find the user
Okay.
and understanding the value in context. But there are huge challenges that remain. I'm sure Suzi would confirm this. Those models are predominantly based on popularity.
Right.
In our world, novelty is what really matters. So the user wants to know what's new and what's different. It moves in the opposite direction as the core of where we're going with information value estimation. So we need new models at the core.
Right.
And we're really working through a system called Orion in instituting those new models. That's Orion is DIA's gateway to ISIGHT, the intelligence community's collective effort
Right.
on this problem. It involves human-machine synergy, bringing people into the loop in terms of the way that we process data. A machine alone can't handle all this data.
Wow. Interesting. Well, yeah, Gus?
And I just want to plug back to the Orion piece, and it's not to take anything away from eyesight. Eyesight is the end state, and so just look at that Orion as more as a strategy on how we get
Right.
from where we are today, this legacy environment, and look at Orion, and look at that as A, and then look at Orion as B through Y,
Right.
and Z is that end state called eyesight, how we end up there, because there's a lot of migration, normalization,
Right.
a lot of things that must occur for us to get to that end state.
Yeah, interesting.
And those are the steps that we're doing between. We call that Orion.
Terrific. Suzi, Dan mentioned NSF potentially having some look at this too. How is the infrastructure changes, or how will big data impact the kind of infrastructure we're going to need in order to work with massive amounts of data like this?
So think about astronomy. In 2000, we stood up the Sloan Digital Sky Survey.
Okay.
And they collected more data in the first couple of weeks that survey was taking pictures of the sky than astronomy had ever had in its whole history. More data collected in 2 weeks than ever before. So we now have 140 terabytes of information about the universe. 930,000 galaxies out there have been identified. And about 500 million celestial objects. We have pictures of them. We don't know what they all are,
Right.
but we have actual graphics of them. But think about the future, right? So I said that NSF is focused on, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. This is only going to get worse. If you think your big data problems are bad today, think again, in 10 years they're going to be terrible.
Right.
Right? So the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, it will be operational in 2022, and it's going to generate 30 terabytes of data every single night, spanning billions of light years.
Wow.
Are we ready for that?
Wow.
That's just one example
Yeah,
of
terrific
what the
example.
future brings.
Terrific example. I do remember when we did the Reinventing Government, too. We were collecting tremendous amounts of data from all different agencies, and we didn't know what to do with it. A lot of it was being thrown away, and it was very, very valuable data going into the bit buckets. Now we're learning how to actually make use of some of that data. I want to hear from our other guests, too, but we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Zach Goldstein from NOAA, Gus Taveras from DIA, Dan Doney from DIA, Audie Hittle from EMC Isilon, Gagan Mehra from Terracotta, and Scott Gaydos from HP Enterprise Services. We're talking big data. When we went to break, we had heard from two of our government guests here, but let me ask Zach to pick up. We haven't heard from you yet. How is this explosion of data impacting your infrastructure decisions and how you're positioning yourselves to manage all this big data?
Well, we've been planning for this for quite some time. We're actually driving our own explosion of big data by our newest satellites, by our latest radars. Ultimately, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of sensors producing untold amounts of data. So some of the things that we've had to do to accommodate as part of our plans, first of all, you have to move this data around the country. Satellites, we bring the data down from specific places on the Earth because of the physics of where a satellite is. But you've got to move the data from one place to another. The supercomputers aren't in the same place as our weather forecasters and so on. So we built a 10 gig network called N-Wave, and we used to transfer enormous amounts of data. By building it ourselves with partners from the university community, we've saved 35% in pricing over if we had simply bought off of existing federal contracts. Okay. We move petabyte per month. And on average, within our high-performance computing program, and we peak at 2.2 petabytes per month. That was as recently as January. Sure. Something else we do, of course, I mentioned earlier that we're archiving 30 petabytes a year. That's a lot of data to archive. So we've taken a hard look at what data we store, what level of data we store. Do we store the raw data? Do we store the products? Between 2009 and 2012, we increased our computing at one lab alone from 56 teraflops to 1.1 petaflops. Wow. It was a 20 times increase. But we kept our archive growth down to 2 times over an 18-month period by the changes we made in our data storage policy. Right. So we think that through. And then the economics are always a big driver. Sure. No one has a lot of money these days, and even if we did, it's taxpayers' money, not ours. Right. So we need to be good stewards of it. So we're looking hard at our cloud strategy as it intersects with big data. If it's primary to our mission, the lives and livelihoods mission that we have, then we're looking at private clouds. And when it's archive, we have a gold copy, but the serving up of archive data and other kinds of research applications, we're looking at public clouds.
Move out to public cloud. Good. Yeah, terrific. How about some of our industry guests? Let's start with Gagan Mehra. How are a company like Terracotta, how do you see the infrastructure challenges here to manage all this big data, different kinds of tools and hardware, software that need to be in place to manage all this? Gagan?
So what we have tried to do at Terracotta is make the challenge as easy to overcome as possible. So we have built our products to run on any commodity servers out there. So the way we operate is we just take all the RAM available on these servers, put them in a cluster, and then scale to terabytes of data in memory. So if you have the RAM available, it's easy to keep terabytes of data in memory. When Suzi was talking about keeping 140 terabytes, we can keep all that in memory. I mean, yesterday, if you saw, Facebook came out with their press release where they talked about querying 200 petabytes of data in real time. So, the technology exists to query 200 petabytes in real time. And I think the biggest challenge we run into is customers or the government people who don't really believe that that can be done.
Yeah, actually, that is. Boy, remember those days where we were like, we were making the date 2 digits because we didn't want to use up those 2. My times have changed, haven't they? Scott Gaydos, what do you think are some of the infrastructure challenges to manage all this data?
Jim, in big data, we talk about sort of the 3 V's all the time, right? Volume, velocity, and variety. And to cover some of those, as Gagan pointed out, there are a lot of infrastructure solutions available from HP and others that help us create the physical hardware, right? Whether it's compute, network, storage, what have you, to take on some of those challenges. But the last V, the variety one, really creates an interesting challenge for the software infrastructure. So by variety, what I'm really talking talking about there is the difference between highly structured data versus completely unstructured data. Things like video,
Sure.
audio, unstructured feeds from social media, and what have you. And what happens there is we can continue and should to throw more hardware at some of the challenges, and that can help us expand. But we need fundamentally different software infrastructures to compose and actually work with a lot of this variety of data. So at HP, we've invested heavily in new software infrastructures, helping us evaluate mass amounts of unstructured data. So using different kind of embedded theorems and Bayesian inference and information theory embedded within software to help us make relationships between data that wasn't already pre-structured by its creator. So you've got all of this highly structured data and this massive influx of unstructured data that needs a completely different software infrastructure to even look at it and make sense of it.
Wow. So some of those advanced math classes I took in college are coming back into play here. I always wondered what I was going to do with that information. Now, glad to see it's being put to use. Audie, Hittle, what do you think? What do you see as some of the infrastructure challenges to manage all this big data?
I think, as noted, the volume, velocity, and variety is really driving the need for greater and greater efficiencies and simplicity in the infrastructure. And as Scott has indicated, a lot of this is going to have to come through software, which is, again, where software innovations such as the Isilon 1FS, which was specifically designed to handle that type of big data, the file-based unstructured data, is a great example of the efficiencies that can be achieved, with efficiencies that can reduce, in some cases, manning required to support the data structures by 80 to 90%. So those are the levels of efficiency I think we need to be targeting. And I really think it really comes down to that type of focus on software and focused on simplicity and efficiencies.
Right. Terrific. We talked a little bit about benefits on the first question, and we'll probably pick a little bit up when we talk about the future. I'd like to stay with challenges here a little bit, because it sounds like we're into some of the major and I know, Suzi, you mentioned that we haven't seen that down the road we're going to have even bigger challenge. What do you see some of the really hard things, the constraints or some of the challenges that we have to overcome in order to truly take advantage of this world of big data? What do you see some of those challenges being?
Well, so I think that we have challenges in pushing the frontiers of the research that we need to do. I think we have challenges in education and workforce development. Mm-hmm. I think we have challenges in developing data infrastructure that is shareable across many communities. So let me just talk about education and workforce for a minute. So we've talked about the technologies, the tools, storage, and all of that. But if we're going to be able to make sense of the data, remember now, the goal is extracting knowledge.
Correct.
Right? Usable information.
Right. It's interesting we got a lot of data, but let's make something with it.
But we're going to make something happen. We're going to make a decision. We're going to save lives. We're going to direct cars to go down that road and not down that road. We're going to evacuate people from that section of the town and not that section of the town. All right? So we need real human beings who can make sense of the data that they are pulling out of the data sets, right? So we need new tools for analysis. We need new visualization tools. But we need to train people that they can understand the provenance of the data. Its veracity, another V, a fourth V. Where did that data come from? What does it mean? What kind of algorithms have been applied to it? And then what can I surmise about what this means for what I should do? McKinsey report 2011, shortfall, almost 200,000 individuals who could be data scientists in our organizations. Right. A million people, shortfall of the managers who understand the importance of big data to their organizations. So I see the people problem, as big as the technology problem that we have. We have a few certificate programs across the land. Lots of universities are starting to do that, but maybe a dozen or so now. So how do we scale up from the
Right.
few that we have
Right.
to really be able to train the workforce that we need for the future?
Yeah, very good. You know, we've talked about STEM programs on the program before, and how do we continue to try to encourage the workforce to, you know, to get involved in, you know, the science and technology and engineering and math and so forth and so forth. Gus Taveras, what do you think? What are some of the challenges, the tough things out there that you still feel like you need to overcome to get where you want to go with this?
Well, I mean, the team has alluded to a lot of the good stuff. Our industry partners. I want to talk about the challenges, and I also want to talk about, as we move forward, how we're addressing at DIA,
Okay.
some of the
Sure.
how we let them come in, and through some stuff that Dan's actually working on in the agency, so that we expose what we're doing with eyesight outwardly to them. And I'll turn it over to Dan.
Dan?
Well, so I certainly want to echo Suzi's comments on this in terms of workforce requirements. In the old days, analysis was dominated by liberal arts
Right.
majors. We increasingly are seeing that there's a breakdown between folks who specialize in specific areas, and now it is you're required to understand all disciplines at all times. There's a real blending between the technologists and the analysts. As analysts are being asked to run Hadoop algorithms and develop what's in one case an analytic is in another case a developer's responsibility.
Wow, yeah.
So the blending of that new discipline is causing us to have to change the way that we bring folks in from a
Sure,
workforce perspective.
absolutely.
It also forces us to blend our relationships with industry. So where in the past we were the receivers of technologies and the consumers of those capabilities,
Sure.
we now need to work in a much more intimate relationship with industry. The public-private partnership really matters,
Right.
where we must participate with the technologists as they develop and grow their capabilities with industry. In the intelligence community, that's a very difficult thing to do,
Sure.
as we have, out of necessity, stayed in a very
Close.
closed environment.
Right.
But it turns out, as we know, we cannot keep up with the pace of change in that setting. So we have to reach out in a new way. And we've developed a mechanism, we're calling it the Open Innovation Gateway, to work in close partnership with industry. This is a complete reversal of the acquisition model, where we spend enormous amount of time discovering the best capabilities that are out there, resources evaluating the capabilities, then integrating those capabilities, accrediting those capabilities, and ultimately fielding them.
Sure.
We're flipping that around, bringing our enterprise to the innovator, so that we can work with them directly in situ, where they sit as they develop, as their technologies grow, so that we can have this closer relationship between what we do and what's coming down the pike.
And we're able to keep up with Moore's law.
Sure.
You know, and the other thing that we're trying to accomplish with this capability is also create this conveyor belt between the lab environment and the operational environment. And
Sure.
so Dan's got this objective of getting that between 30 days from cradle to
Right.
grave. That's I don't know if you want to talk about that. real quick.
Well, agility is the new necessity.
Right.
What we know with the pace of change, with the speed that we're acquiring
Right.
data, we must keep pace. So agility in the government have not typically in the past
Yeah, I mean,
been.
you know, we face, you know, certification, accreditation processes we're 2 generations past the technology being certified when we get there.
Absolutely.
So it is a understandable, real challenge.
So we're trying to make them more agile through this open innovation platform, as well as leverage the industry investments and bring them into this new eyesight
Right.
construct.
Right, so we used to have need to know, then we went to need to share, now it sounds like responsibility to share and work with industry.
So we may have come full circle on that very issue. So it turns out, I think in the past we've thought about it wrong, where we thought about security and sharing as 2 separate
Right,
disciplines.
Right.
In fact, they're 2 sides of the same coin.
Sure.
And our inability to address it as the same issue has caused us to swing the pendulum all the way in one direction. And now,
Right.
with recent events, we've come back full circle to heading in the opposite direction.
Absolutely. I think if we want to have skilled workforce out there, then government agencies need to talk to folks about the kinds of things that need to be done. And Zach, what do you think? What are some challenges or constraints or some things you feel like we have to overcome to really get to where you want to go with this?
A lot of the challenges are the same things that my colleagues have already been talking about. Starting with people, I'd like to put an interesting twist on it, and I think you'll appreciate this as a former CIO, Jim. The data scientists that we have at NOAA are focused on environmental science.
Right.
They've been doing data stewardship for decades.
Right.
They get metadata, they get standardization, they get looking back at the data as science changes. But they're burdened by also doing IT things. And one of the things that we can do as a Chief Information Officer's office is taking away a lot of the IT burdens so that the people don't have to be worrying about their systems at the same time as they're worrying about their data.
Focus on the mission.
Right. So we don't have the resources, and we've already talked about the shortages of the personnel.
Right.
We're not looking at adding data scientists. We're looking at freeing our data scientists to do what they do best, which is managing the data. We were talking about the balance of security and access and sharing, and now being two sides of the same coin, as you said. That's exactly one of the challenges that we have. We can't keep buying a satellite for every requirement we have. We have a plan, and we're using that, but we need to leverage the observation data of international partners.
Sure.
And that means doing some unnatural things. The people that you might be saying, we have to keep them out, we're not keeping them out, we're letting them in. We're inviting them in. We're using their data. We're sharing our data with them, and they're sharing the data with us. So that means that we have new sorts of security challenges.
Sure.
As we develop the sharing, we have to develop the security about the sharing, and the security is what enables the sharing. So that's a challenge, but we're working it. Some of the other stuff we've talked about, we have to move data around. We have to keep our networks up so we don't have too much data latency. An old forecast is a useless forecast.
Yeah, right.
We have to worry about data provenance. A colleague from the NSF was talking about that, especially when it's coming from commercial sources, when it's coming from international sources. They did it maybe because they were generating some data for sale. We're doing it because we have to make sure that we issue the right warning at the right time to save lives. We've got to make sure the right data is coming from the right place. So provenance becomes important. Data integrity becomes important. These are all the things that we're dealing with as well.
Yeah, so lots of data is important, but the integrity of the data and the quality of the data becomes an overriding concern too. Bad data is not going to be useful to anyone.
And if you're going to share it, you have to be focusing on...
Make sure you're sharing the right thing in the right data.
And the metadata has to be of good enough quality that people can find it and know how to use it.
Sure.
So we have an initiative to improve our metadata quality and to tag our data.
Sure. Gus, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, we all kept bringing up the people, and it goes back, so I think the one last challenge before you get off that one is culture. And, you know, one of my bosses used to say, hey, there's digital natives, digital immigrants, and digital illegal immigrants. Right. And so there's also, back to her point about education and educating the people, we need to figure out how do we get there.
Right.
Because if not, we're gonna lose the fight that we're trying to accomplish with this fast and rapid changing technology.
Right. Gus, you just made our show 94 for 94. And every show we have had, someone along the way brings up the challenge of culture and change. Every single time, it's something that gets emphasized is that technology is one set of issues, but people and culture change are a whole nother set of issues because there's a lot of folks that are just, have traditional ways of doing things, and those models are being challenged. I want to hear from our industry guest on this too, but we need to take another short break here. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Zach Goldstein from NOAA, Gus Taveras from DIA, Dan Doney from DIA, Suzi Iacono from NSF, Audie Hittle from EMC Isilon, Gagan Mehra from Terracotta, and Scott Gaydos from HP Enterprise Services. We were talking challenges. I'd like to hear a little bit from our industry guests too. Let's start with you, Gagan, over at Terracotta. What are some of the challenges you see that have to be overcome in order to really take advantage of this big data explosion?
Yeah, so I agree with my colleagues out here. The biggest challenge we run into is people, on the people front. And I think most of the challenges are the lack of awareness around how to tackle the big data challenge, how to get started.
Right.
That's the first challenge we run into. And the second challenge is trying to believe what the product can do.
Right.
So when we talk about accessing terabytes of data in milliseconds, the first reaction is no. That's not possible.
That's true. You know, every now and then I bump into a company, they'll tell me something else, I don't believe that. And then they'll prove me wrong. I mean, things are changing. Technology's advancing.
So one of the things we end up doing is we, as part of the process of selling the product, we do a free of cost technical POC.
Right.
Just to make people believe that the product can actually do what
Yeah.
we're telling them that it can do.
Yeah, I think a lot of the new niche products coming out now that do some really cool things, I think are going to have to start with proof of concepts because they're
Right.
not believable when you read about them. But Scott Gaydos, what do you think? Some of the big challenges that need to be overcome?
Jim, I want to pull on that thread a little bit more that Gagan started,
Okay.
and Dan mentioned one of the big data, big words as well in Hadoop. So this idea of awareness of everything that's out there and the
Right.
vast amount of technology solutions that are available, it can be extremely daunting to figure out which one applies to my problem or which composite of these applies to my problem, because many times, we see clients say, well, I have a big data challenge, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to stand up a Hadoop cluster, we're going to get a bunch
Right.
of people starting to write some MapReduce jobs, and that may very well be the right decision, especially if your data is sort of highly unstructured, the velocity is such that you want to bring it in and you can evaluate it through key value pairs. But if you're talking about a totally different problem, say something in semantic interoperability between
Right.
healthcare data, understanding whether or not somebody that said pneumonia and somebody that said cold or some other kind of
Right.
cold, were they talking about the same thing or not? That semantic interoperability of highly structured data requires a very different answer
Right.
than something. So awareness of everything that's out there and sort of sorting through this sea of
Right.
available solutions,
To
which
match
continue to
to
expand,
match the solution to the problem.
is a massive challenge. And so it's one that requires a lot of thought, a lot of discussion to figure out what is the right solution
Sure.
for my particular big data challenge.
Yeah, very well. So it's not like Word versus Word perfect anymore.
Right.
Huh? It's a little bit more complicated. Audie, Hittle, what do you think that are some of the challenges that you see that still need to be overcome to really get where we want to go?
Sure. I'd like to jump on Gus's comment about culture and a thread off of that on collaboration and the importance of collaboration and the ability of new technologies, as Scott mentioned, being aware of new technologies that can enhance collaboration. For instance, one of our medical researchers is an organization that has over 2,000 researchers, each previously with individual siloed data stores, if you will, localized data stores. With new technologies such as Isilon, scale-out DAS, we're able to bring up to 20 petabytes of data under a single file system. What this does is eliminate the need for the individual localized management and cost of those individual servers and data stores, if you will, but it also, more importantly, provides that data in a forum where you can look across all of those silos to conduct the big data analytics across all the data available. So I think that's part of, and that induces the researchers to go, wow, I didn't know that existed. Oh my gosh, if I could combine this with that, look what I can do in terms of the outcome we can have.
Very good.
So I think the collaboration, the new leveraging new technologies like the scale-out network-attached storage with large capacities up to 20 petabytes for a single file system, those are the kinds of things that I think can enhance that.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. Thank you. In all our shows, we like to turn and sort of like think out into the future a little bit about where all this is going, and we've got a couple minutes left here. About if I can ask each one of you, give me maybe your minute and a half version of where this is all going. Can you share a vision with us? What impacts in the government will we see, and what kinds of programs in, say, like 5-10 years out? We're doing all this work now. What do we expect it to do in terms of changing our future? Let's work our way right down the table here. We'll start with Gagan. Mehra, what's your crystal ball look like?
Well, a crystal ball, pretty straightforward, I would say. We have three things that we are focusing on. The first thing is, right now, we have our largest customer who's holding about 200 terabytes in memory. I guess in a few months from now, I want to come back and talk about our largest customer holding hundreds of petabytes in memory.
Right.
So we want to hold more data in memory. The second thing is, we want to make sure we continue to support the low latency. So currently we are at millisecond level for hundreds of terabytes. There is no reason why we can't support the same millisecond level latency with hundreds of petabytes in memory.
Sure.
So that's second part of our vision. The third thing is make it easy to deploy. Right now, when we deploy our products, it takes less than 3 months to deploy the product. And going forward, we want to make it even simpler, make
Sure.
the duration even shorter. So
Sure.
it's pretty straightforward.
Ease of use.
Ease of use, yeah.
Very good. Well said. Scott Gaydos, what's it look like down the road for you? Where's this all going? What changes are we going to see coming about down the road?
Jim, in health, one of the big challenges we see is that historically, a lot of evaluating whether or not the healthcare system is working, a lot of times is retrospective review. Events have already happened. Let's take a look. Let's go back and take a look at it. I think one of the things that we see changing with big data is a transition to more real-time review. So, for instance, one of the things that we're helping an organization like the Department of Veterans Affairs do right now is light up all of their hospitals and clinics with a massive sensor array tagging literally millions of medical devices, other consumables, other equipment, so that there is a real-time sense of everything that's actually underway in an individual hospital, for all the hospitals in that region, all the hospitals in the nation. So a real-time view as to what's going on. And I think the big change we'll see in 5 to 10 years is, how does that knowledge of my real-time enterprise change how I actually deliver healthcare? Because now I'm not just stuck in retrospective review of events that took place even a day ago, a week ago, or God forbid, a year ago, but what's happening in my org right now.
Yeah.
And so that's fundamentally changing how we can deliver healthcare and how we can provide better public health to the nation.
Yeah, excellent. It's back to my decision making when time equals zero. Suzi Iacono, I guess part of your job at NSF is to think down the road, right?
That's right.
So I guess you could just tell us what it's going to be like.
Well, I'm incredibly optimistic. I'll start there. And so having been at NSF for a number of years, I've been able to watch the arc of science. And so I've been able to see the beginnings of ideas and new investments actually lead to discoveries, actually lead to innovation and real impacts on
exciting.
Society.
Right.
And so I don't believe it's going to be any different for big data. We've encouraged the brightest folks out there to come to us with their best ideas. And so I believe they're going to make a really big impact. For example, can we predict the onset of diseases? Can we reduce traffic congestion? Can we accurately predict natural disasters? Can we enhance public safety? Can we change the face of education with online learning and these MOOCs that have 200,000 students?
Wow.
Right? And the researcher can collect every click, every stop that a learner had to look at a page. And we can really begin to develop a science of learning because we have the complete data set on how people learn. And so I think that big data is going to change the face of our research in all of these areas and make a big impact on national priorities. But I want to leave everyone with a challenge. So the president called for an all-hands-on-deck effort. And so the U.S. government cannot affect all these changes by itself. The agencies together can't do it either. So we need industry, we need for-profit firms, we need mayors' offices, we need economic development associations to come together in multi-stakeholder partnerships around big data and come up with projects that are win-win for the region.
Sure.
So a firm works with a university, gives use cases, data sets to the young kids in college, and they have real data that they can play in with their data mining techniques. And so the industry wins because they have new, fresh looks at their data, right? So I believe that, across the country, we really need to develop these public-private
collaboration
partnerships.
and the old adage that
That's
none
right.
of us is as smart as all of us.
That's
So
right.
let's get all the brains working together here. Audie, Hittle, what's it look like down the road for you?
Like Suzi, I'm extremely optimistic, and I feel that over the past 20 years, I've been anticipating this new era of government-industry collaboration. But the good news is I believe we're finally here. I believe that we've got the technology
I do,
now.
I do too. I think actually budgets are pushing it that way too.
They are,
You
absolutely.
need to share
Yeah.
that knowledge.
And we've got the technology, we've got the recognition of the cultural challenges, the need for the skills development. So I believe that we're at that age where we are able to finally do that. And I think that the big data is actually going to provide us that impetus, if you will. We've got the ability to store the data now, to effectively, actively, and real-time access a lot of the data, combining it with real-time information. So I think that we're at a point where we're just at the tip of the iceberg of beginning to appreciate the true value from big data. But I'm very optimistic that we're on the right track.
Terrific. Dan Doney and Gus Taveras, what does it look like down the road for you folks? Where do you see this all going?
I think we're right on the verge of a major change in the way that we interact with data. So we've seen small changes in data interaction in the past. We had the keyboard and monitor, then we had the mouse, and now we have touchscreen with goggles, which is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There's about to be a very big difference in the intimacy between human and machine. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The bottom line is technology disruption is commonplace. So for anyone to predict where we're going to be in 5 to 10 years is impossible. So the imperative that this creates is, as we mentioned earlier, industry. So the way we do things in government now, our whole requirements process, where we only get what we know to ask for, ensures that we're going to be on the wrong end of disruption. So disruption will occur, and we'll be the last to know. So as Gagan and Scott mentioned, we have to come up with better mechanisms to find out what we don't know, the capabilities that exist that we didn't know to tap into.
Right.
This is where we're pushing this new model that allows the innovator to participate, even if we didn't know to find them.
Very good. So yeah, proactive, get out in front. Don't wait for it to happen. Let's get out in front of it before it happens. Gus, anything you want to add to that?
Just 3 key points. I mean, at DIA, I see a more intimate relationship between the technologist and the functionals there, which are the actual guys fighting the mission. With the community, like Dan said, I see a better relationship with us and industry. And then finally, at the community level, larger, the IC level, an environment where information sharing is possible in the next 5 to 10 years, and we're able to prevent strategic surprise here at home and abroad.
Yeah, well said. Thanks, Gus. Zach Goldstein at NOAA, what do you see? What's it look like down the road? What's your crystal ball look like out there?
Well, as my colleague said, it's always hard to know what technology is going to bring, but if you look at what we do today and what we're starting to do with big data, you can see where the trends are going to take us. First of all, our mission is going to drive us to have more improved forecasts, greater lead times for tornado, hurricane warnings, while keeping our costs under control. Moore's Law, lots of other things can help us do that. There are other benefits we're going to get. We're starting to see the inklings of sharing. An example very recently with Sandy, going back to that event, was NOAA and the Census Bureau. The emergency managers on the ground took together census data and NOAA's forecasting data to figure out where to place the evacuation shelters, making sure that they weren't going to be inundated by the floods and the storm surge that we were predicting.
Oh, good point.
So that was something that was done ad hoc. In the future, that will be routine with improvements in metadata and plans to share. We talked about the culture changes that are occurring.
Right.
The culture change inside NOAA, where people who are scientists, regulators, law enforcement people, we enforce fish regulations, and meteorologists, of course, focus on what they do. And the data managers focus on what they do, and they're not worried about doing IT stuff because we've partnered with industry, we're going to the cloud, we're reducing our costs, we're doing what we know how to do best and not trying to invent what industry is already giving to us. And last is the idea that we put data out there, and this is part of the President's Digital Data Initiative, and it's been part of his Open Government Initiative from day one. I think it was literally day one of his administration, first administration. And that's growing the economy. Through the reuse of our data. So we already see it happening now with the insurance industry. There's a multi-billion-dollar weather industry. AccuWeather, the Weather Channel, they don't have their own satellites. They don't have their own radars. those are owned by the American people.
Right.
But look at the industry and look at the economy that's
Sure.
grown from that. That'll be even more so, from coastal planning to supply chain management and everything in between. That's what we see is growing the American economy, generating jobs, building on big data.
Wow, that's some great stuff there, man. I mean, when you first go in to talk about big data, you think about, a bunch of data, how are we going to manage it and so forth. And what we heard today are some tremendous stories of how this big data is going to turn out to save lives and improve the economy. Let me do a real quick recap here, try to give you some of the things I jotted down while we were talking. When we were talking about some of the examples, we were talking about the fact that this is all about saving lives. I mean, this is big data can be put to use in the health field and in healthcare to discover things that we never would have discovered without this capabilities. I like the National Science Foundation, where discoveries begin. You're viewing big data as being just another one of those sort of breakthroughs in time, where we now have another opportunity for to discover some new things down the road. And I like the fact we talked about eliminating fraud and other social benefits that come about. I think all taxpayers are okay with paying their share of taxes, but they like to not pay other share of taxes, so we can get fraud and waste out of government programs. I think that would be tremendous benefit. We also talked on challenges that there will be some infrastructure challenges. It's going to change the way we manage, the way we take care of data. We talked about the need for research. We talked about the need for better collaboration, and it's going to take everyone working these issues together. Different agencies will have different niche leads, but it's going to take a collaborative environment. We talked about the fact we're going to need an educated workforce. There's some challenges here, and to get the depth we need in these different programs is going to take some education. We talked about visualization being important, and I think it was Einstein that says, if I can't visualize it, I can't understand it. So, and how visualization tools can help crunch through a lot of these massive amounts of data. And of course, we threw the culture issue out on the table. This is a challenge, and this is going to create some challenges for agencies. The future, we see speed of use, we see economic benefits, focus on mission rather than the IT itself, and this being the impetus for innovation and creativity in the future. I want to first thank our panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to share with us the great knowledge that you all have on this subject.